One of the problems we face today, of course, is the problem of computer crime. As auditors, we're often going to be involved in then investigating and certainly trying to take remedial action once a computer crime has taken place. Computer crime results in significant financial loss for many organizations. This also includes, of course, severe damage to their reputation and the confidence that their customers will have in them as an organization. In many cases, computer crime is related to industrial espionage and the loss of intellectual property and competitive advantage. Some computer crime is simply malicious, doing damage for the sake of damage. While this is in many cases not quite as hazardous as some of the others, such as loss of intellectual property, this certainly can be an annoyance and distraction for a company's IT department. There are a couple of different types of computer crime. One where what we would call the real type of computer crime is where the computer itself is the target of the attack. The computer has been in some way damaged or harmed by the attack. But in many cases, it's not really a computer crime. Many of the crimes we call computer crimes are really just traditional crimes where the computer is being used as a tool in the commission of that crime. A crime such as fraud, for example, is simply fraud. However, very often today a computer is used to actually conduct that fraud. We also have, of course, cases where, say for example, a perpetrator has been arrested. We seize their equipment, their phone, we seize their computers, and we find then that those computers become a source of evidence we can use then in the investigation. So in the investigation of computer crime, we have to remember that there are actually three different areas here that actually apply to the definition of what is computer crime. There's also a lot of different variation in the people that conduct crime, the perpetrators themselves. Back in the 1990s especially, we had a lot of problems with script kiddies who would deface web pages, and in many cases a group like Anonymous fits into that category of a script kiddie, quite simply using tools for notoriety, egotistical based attacks that in many cases don't really do a lot of severe damage, but they do it for the sake of recognition and to be noticed by their peers. We also have the hackers. Hackers who have broken into systems, in some cases just to prove that they can, in some cases in order to be able then to actually commit financial theft as well. But today we worry more about what we'll call APTs, or Advanced Persistent Threats. An advanced persistent threat refers to the type of criminal who has the skill. That is, they are advanced, they are well trained in many cases, they have access to tools, they have access to, in many cases, the resources necessary to conduct a very significant attack against a company, against a military, and against a country's infrastructure, for example. And they are persistent threats because they don't just give up if it's difficult. In many cases, an APT is sponsored either by an organized criminal gang or else by another country's military. And the advanced persistent threat then has that motivation as well as the skill to be able to actually pose a significant risk to the targeted organization. One of the most dangerous, of course, always, is where an employee does something wrong. Now, it could be that the employee did that unintentionally, they just deleted the wrong file. Or in many cases, we see a disgruntled, unhappy employee may launch an attack against an organization. There are a number of different types of computer crime that we should be familiar with. We have something called robotically controlled networks, or botnets for short. A botnet is a whole series of compromised computers. Each of these computers has been compromised, usually with something we call a zombie. A little tool that sits on that computer and takes over that computer, so it can be used then at the command of the bot herder or the person who controls the botnet. The botnet itself, in many cases, arranges a number of different machines through command and control servers that can be used in anything from the distribution of spam to very large distributed denial of service attacks against a victim organization. There's been a lot of different types of malicious software, or malware as we call it. Malware, ranging from viruses and trojans and worms and logic bombs, also includes things like spyware that capture people's personal information, such as credit card or banking data, and adware, which then plagues a person with unsolicited and unwanted advertising. One of the problems that many organizations have faced is a denial of service, where their services, their network, their servers are unavailable and can't be used for normal business practice. In some cases, a denial of service may actually originate from a number of different points, and this is what we'll call then a distributed denial of service. A distributed denial of service, quite often taking advantage of things like amplification and reflection attacks, can cause an organization's entire network to be unavailable and unable then for that organization to serve their customers. Another problem is someone listening in, eavesdropping or sniffing on network traffic, able to pick up, for example, wireless communications, able to then tap into communications lines so they can then capture the information that they wanted to then listen in on. There's always been the problem of spam, unwanted, unsolicited email that can flood not only, of course, networks and servers and can flood a poor victim's machine, but in many cases, spam also contains malware that is then used to try to take over that person's machine. This also can be used in some cases with flooding a system through something we often call mail bombing, so the person is unable then to use their system quite simply because of exhaustion of their resources, such as their network, their CPU, or their memory. There's always been the problem of, social engineering. Social engineering quite often will take the form of masquerading or spoofing, where a person pretends to be someone they're not. We can do spoofing using IP addresses, using media access control addresses, MAC addresses. We can have spoofing where a person pretends to be an administrator of a system and convinces someone to give them information they shouldn't have had access to. Another type of attack is where somebody inserts themselves into the middle of a communications channel. This will allow them to both monitor the traffic and in some cases even modify the traffic as well. This is known as a man-in-the-middle attack. We also have seen cases where an organization has lost, for example, their DNS records related to their company's name, so that instead of them being able to have company.com, somebody else has seized that name and they're unable to use the name that should really have belonged to them. This is often called farming. And farming relates then to types of DNS or domain name system related attacks. There's also been, especially with financial transactions, the problem of packet replay. Replay or resending transactions that already should have been completed. We often see in a physical security case, the case where someone will follow another person into a room. The first person unlocks the door and then holds it for the next person. Well, it could well be the second person was not authorized to have access, but they've been able then to tailgate in behind another person, or sometimes this is called piggybacking. But we also see this in an electronic format as well, where a person might try to hijack the session that belongs to another person, or take over another trusted connection that somebody else has already set up. One of the most famous attacks, which has become, of course, well known through some of the Hollywood movies as well, is the salami attack. The salami attack is where small amounts of financial transactions are cut off from the system, and those small amounts may add up to a significant amount of money in the end. We've also had the problem of sniffing wireless and network communications, and someone taking over another person's machine through a back door, or sometimes called a RAT, which stands for Remote Access Trojan. There's capturing people's login information using keystroke loggers. A keystroke logger could be either software or a hardware device used to capture what a person is typing in on their keyboard, which of course will often include things like passwords and user IDs. We also have seen a number of attacks related to screen scraping. This, of course, allows a person, an attacker, to be able to see what is actually displayed on a victim's machine at that time. And screen scraping has often been done in financial fraud attacks. So we should be ready for this. And part of our job as auditors is to check that our organization has a viable and certainly workable, effective incident response plan. Incident response should, of course, be a plan based on a series of different phases. And quite simply, incident response should happen long before we have an incident through preparation and planning, having the right team in place, having then the ability to monitor, to notify, and alert if there's a problem. But incident response also consists then of trying to make sure we don't have an incident. We put in some types of course, precautions to try to prevent an attack. But then we need to have the alerts, the alarms, the monitoring, so we're able then to detect and notice if something has gone wrong. Quite often when we've had an incident, the first thing we want to do is contain it. Stop it from spreading, getting into other areas or affecting other systems. And this containment allows us to regain control then of that situation. But once we have contained the problem, we need to get back to normal. We go through a process of rebuilding, or we could call it even a restoration. And that, of course, could mean that we rebuild from backups. We then have to redesign our systems to make sure we're not going to be attacked again. Every incident contains a wealth of gold, little nuggets of gold that are lessons we can learn. And this is, of course, what a good security person should seek. The ability now to ensure that every incident has been examined through a formal feedback process. And that feedback process can help us to be better at prevention, better at detection, and certainly also better at how we respond to an incident when it happens. The auditor should make sure that lessons that have been learned from previous incidents have actually then been applied. It's important we have a skilled and effective team to deal with incidents. There should be a clear leader. The person we know has the authority to make decisions and lead then the incident response process. We should have people involved from the security department, especially if this is going to end up in investigations and forensics. We should have IT administrators who can arrange for access and, in many cases, provide the logs and other supporting evidence we need in an incident. We should have people from the business that can tell us then what the impact on the business is and how best then to address this incident from a business perspective. We should also have people on board from legal and human resources and corporate communications. These are people that can make sure that our strategy and actions when we're dealing with an incident certainly are legal, and that we have paid due respect to the rights of the various people involved. We want to make sure that if this incident is a public incident, that we have communicated effectively with government, with the public, with the community, and of course with our internal employees. The way we communicate during an incident can quite often help us either to gain the confidence of our customers, or in some cases, of course, can lead to significant public relations damage if the communications have not been handled in a timely, forthright, and honest manner. There are many types of incidents we should be ready for. Obviously, natural events, storms, fires, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, all the various natural events that can happen. But there's also incidents related to, theft or even loss of equipment or data. There's the problem of a breach of privacy, a person getting in and stealing, say, customer or even employee data. There's the problem of unauthorized access to our systems or improper modification of some of our data, as well as, of course, the problem of theft. Theft of equipment, theft of any type of then those IT assets we are using then to operate our systems and support business operations.